I have carried this secret for 63 years. I carried it through decades of prayer and silence, through the slow erosion of memory that comes with age, through moments when the weight of it pressed so heavily against my chest that I genuinely believed it would stop my heart before I ever found the courage to speak. But I am 81 years old now, and the men who would have killed me for telling this story are dead. And I find that I am no longer willing to let the truth die with me. My name is Sister Cecilia Marguerite, and I was present the night a dictator's child was born, and I was present the night that child was replaced with another, and I am the only person left alive who knows exactly what happened in that delivery room, and why, and what it changed about the history of an entire nation. I need you to understand who I was before that night, because who I was before matters enormously to understanding how I arrived at the choice I made. I entered the convent of St. Magdalene in Bucharest in 1951 when I was 19 years old, and Romania was 3 years deep into a communist regime that was systematically dismantling everything my family had believed in. My father had been a teacher. They took his school. My mother had been a woman of quiet but genuine faith. They took her church. I became a nun partly because I loved God, and partly because the convent was one of the few places left in Romania where the state's long hands had not yet fully reached, where something of the old world still breathed, quietly and carefully, behind closed doors. By 1964, I had been a nun for 13 years, and I had developed a reputation, if that is the right word for something you never seek and cannot control, for exceptional competence in medical situations. Sister Agata, who had trained as a midwife before the war, had taught me everything she knew during the years when I assisted her in the convent's small infirmary. When Sister Agata died in 1962, I became the sister the local hospital called when they needed someone calm and capable, and absolutely discreet. I want you to hold that word, discreet. It is the word that led directly to the most terrible and most necessary night of my life. The call came on a January evening in 1964. I remember the cold with a physical precision I have never lost, the kind of Romanian January cold that feels personal, that feels like the weather itself is hostile to human existence. A black car arrived at the convent gate without announcement. Two men in civilian clothes, who were very obviously not civilians, told me I was needed at a private medical facility immediately, that I should bring my medical bag, and that I should tell no one where I was going. The way they said that last part made very clear that this was not a suggestion. They drove me for 40 minutes through Bucharest's winter streets to a building I did not recognize and have never been able to locate since, a large house on the edge of the city that had been converted into a private medical facility for the exclusive use of the regime's most important figures. I understood within minutes of arriving that I was there because a woman of enormous political significance was in labor, and that the birth was not going well, and that the doctors were frightened, not of medical failure, but of political consequences, and that my presence had been requested specifically because I was known to be capable of remaining calm in crisis situations, and because I was a nun, and nuns, even in communist Romania, carried a particular kind of moral authority that made patients trust them in ways they did not always trust doctors. The woman in labor was the wife of a senior party official whose name I will not write even now, because his descendants are still living, and because what I am telling you implicates them in ways they may not fully understand. What I will tell you is that he was a man of tremendous power and documented cruelty, a man whose decisions had sent thousands of Romanian families to labor camps, a man whose name made ordinary people lower their voices when they spoke it. And his wife was in that room, laboring through what the doctors had already determined was a catastrophic situation. The child she was carrying was not going to survive. They had known this for weeks from the medical indicators, though they had told her nothing, because telling her meant telling him, and telling him meant consequences nobody in that room wanted to face. The baby was born just after midnight, a boy. He lived for 11 minutes, and I held him for all 11 of those minutes, and I prayed over him. And I want you to know that I have prayed for that small soul every single day since then, because he deserved that, and he deserved so much more. When he was gone, I wrapped him in a white cloth, and I sat with his mother while she slept from the sedative the doctors had administered, because they needed time to decide what to do before she woke, and before her husband arrived. What happened in that room during the next 2 hours was not my plan. I want to be completely honest about this, because honesty is the only reason I am telling this story at all. The plan was already in motion before I fully understood what I was participating in. One of the doctors, a man I will call only by his first name, Constantine, had been quietly working against the regime for years through a network I had not previously known existed. He had known about this birth for months. He had known the child was unlikely to survive. And he had arranged, through channels I still do not entirely understand, for another infant to be present in that facility on that night. The other child had been born 3 days earlier to a young woman in a village outside Bucharest. She was a widow. She was desperately poor. She had 4 other children and no means of feeding a fifth. Constantine had found her through the network, had explained in terms she could understand that her son would be given to a family of means, that he would be educated and protected, and given opportunities she could never provide. She had wept for 2 days, and then she had signed a paper that Constantine had drafted, and she had kissed her infant son and given him to a woman from the network who had been waiting in a room 3 doors down from where I sat holding a dead child in my arms. Constantine came to me when the mother was still sedated. He explained what was going to happen. He explained it quietly, matter-of-factly, with the particular calm of a man who has spent years making impossible decisions and has learned to keep his hands steady while making them. He told me that the infant boy waiting 3 doors down was healthy and that he would be presented to the official and his wife as their biological son. He told me that the biological child would be recorded in the facility's private registry as a stillbirth. He told me that the official's wife would be told, when she woke, that her baby had survived, but had required immediate medical intervention, which explained any slight discrepancy in the timeline. And then Constantine looked at me, and he said something I have turned over in my mind for 60 years. He said that this child, this healthy infant boy about to be placed into one of the most powerful and most dangerous families in Romania, would grow up with access, with education, with proximity to power, and that Constantine and the network intended to make sure that as that boy grew, as he moved through the world, his adoptive father's name would open for him. He would be guided, carefully and patiently, toward using that access in ways that would help the people his adoptive father was destroying. He told me this was not deception for the sake of deception. It was deception as a long instrument of justice. I sat in that room for a very long time. I sat with the white bundle in my arms and the sleeping woman in the bed, and Constantine waiting in the doorway. And I thought about every vow I had ever taken. I thought about honesty and sanctity and the absolute prohibition against deception that my faith had built into me across 13 years of formation. And then I thought about the villages emptied of their men. I thought about the families I had watched destroyed by the machine this official operated. I thought about the widow in her village who had kissed her son and given him towards something better than she could provide. And I thought about that small boy who had lived 11 minutes in my arms, who had never been given any chance at all. I placed the white bundle gently on the bed beside the sleeping woman. I walked to the door. I told Constantine I would assist with whatever medical support the infant required through the transition. I did not say yes to what he was doing. I did not say no. I simply made clear that I was not going to stop it. And in that room, on that night, that silence was its own kind of answer. The infant boy was brought in. He was healthy and round and furious at being awake at that hour, which, under the circumstances, struck me as entirely appropriate. I checked his vitals. I documented nothing. When the mother woke an hour later, I held her hand while Constantine told her that her son was alive and well, and that the delivery had been complicated, but that everything was resolved. She wept with relief. She asked to hold him. I placed him in her arms. She looked at his face, and she said he looked like her own father, who had died in the war, and that she had always hoped for that. I left the facility before dawn in the same black car, driven by the same men who had said nothing on the way there and said nothing on the way back. I returned to the convent. I went to the chapel, and I stayed there until the morning office, kneeling on the cold stone floor, not praying so much as simply remaining in the presence of something larger than what I had just done, asking without words whether what I had participated in could be held inside a life still oriented toward goodness. The boy grew up. I watched from a careful distance over the years, through information that reached me through Constantine's network, when it reached me at all. He was educated, as Constantine had predicted. He moved through the corridors of power his father's name unlocked. And slowly, carefully, in ways that took years to become visible, he began to use that access differently than his father had used it. I will not tell you his name. I will not tell you specifically what he did, because even now that information could harm living people. But I will tell you that certain decisions, made at certain critical moments in Romanian history, decisions that softened what might have been far more brutal outcomes, decisions that protected people who had every reason to expect destruction, trace back to choices made by a man who never knew he had been placed by a network of desperate people into a position specifically so that he might one day make them. I do not know whether what I did was right. I have prayed over it for 60 years, and prayer has given me presence with the question, but not resolution of it. I know that a mother was deceived in the most intimate possible way, and I carry the weight of that without excuse. I know that a woman in a village gave up her son in grief and love and trust that he would be given towards something good, and I genuinely believe, that he was. I know that an 11-minute life was treated with the dignity it deserved, wrapped in white and prayed over by the only person in that room who was not thinking about political consequences. I know that I am a woman who took a vow of honesty and spent one night in its complete violation, and that the world that exists because of that night is different in specific and measurable ways from the world that would have existed otherwise. Whether that difference justified the deception is a question I leave to God, because God is the only one with enough of the complete picture to answer it honestly. I have given my account. I have told the truth about the night I kept a secret. And I find, at 81, sitting in the same chapel where I knelt on cold stone 60 years ago, that telling it feels less like unburdening and more like finally completing something. A prayer I began that night, and have only now, with these words, finally managed to finish.